Hello and welcome to the program Woke Up, where we amplify the voices of those who have had many experiences on the left, different mindsets that tended toward Marxism and Marxist thought, but then they realized it was leading to a place they didn't want to go. And today we have an incredible guest, a woman who has given her life, a professional to women's health issues. She's an herbalist, she's a midwife, she's a nurse practitioner. She's the owner of a very successful medical clinic in Albuquerque, Enchanted Family Medicine. And it's a real honor. We have on the show today Mary Lou Singleton from Albuquerque. Mary Lou, how are you today?
I'm great, Michael. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk.
So why don't you just start telling us a little bit about yourself, your passions, and a little bit of your pathway and the things that you've been so incredibly involved with?
Sure. When we were talking before the show, you were like asking about my history. So I just thought I would, I have an interesting trajectory. I would say I came out of the womb mad about sexism. Like that's kind of my driving force is recognizing women's full humanity, while recognizing the full human experience of being female, and being pretty angry about the way the world's set up to denigrate women in so many ways. And, it's interesting, like I think one of the first cancel cultures is women feeling like we internally have to say, oh, I know men have it hard too. But for me personally, I'm not a man. I came out female, and I came out into a very sexist right-wing family, a very, very traditionalist Catholic family, and was really aware of the difference in the way boys and girls were treated from the time I can remember. My parents were right-wing activists. They were the co-chairs of Pennsylvanians for Human Life. My mother started one of the first crisis pregnancy centers in Pennsylvania called Lifeline. I was there a lot as a child, just doing, while my parents were volunteering there. I grew up in that right-wing activist world. I went to Catholic school. One of my first experiences with thought policing was my first communion, where I remember just being this, this little 7-year-old in my itchy dress and thinking, I don't believe it. I don't actually believe the priest is turning the bread into Jesus. And I can't make myself believe it. I just can't, I can't get there. I can't get this grace or this faith everyone's talking about. And I turned to my best friend, Stacy, and I said, I don't believe it. I don't really believe it. And she said, you can't say that. You can't even think that. Don't say it to anyone else. You'll be in so much trouble if you say it again. So I have a long history with being told what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, understanding the social ramifications of saying the unsayable, thinking the unthinkable. I continued, believing mostly what my parents believed politically up until like high school, when I started seeing again, just the extreme sexism, like just being told to my face that girls aren't as smart as boys. They're not as good at math. When I had a near perfect math score on my SAT, I was always the smartest kid in the class. I was better at math than, 99% of the boys in the town, and just having to be gaslit like that of, girls aren't good at that. Girls aren't good at that. And also seeing the way the gay kids around me were being treated, that watching my, my gay friends in high school be beaten up, be terrorized. So I went to college, having been kind of turned pretty liberal, and I went to a small liberal arts college where I would say I was indoctrinated into mainstream left-wing thinking of, very much about the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, that every institution is rotten to the core and needs to be destroyed, that, the whole thing that just, I also all the liberal structural stuff of, at the same time, we're trying to burn it down. We want the government to give us healthcare. We want the government to pay for housing, to give, even back then people were talking about universal basic income. So I kind of became a left-wing lockstep thinker, subscribed to the Nation, got a lot of my ideas from the left at that time. And then in the early 2010s, I guess, started kind of waking up from that. I had been really indoctrinated into a lot of the sex positive feminism, thought that porn was okay as long as it was feminist porn, started to see the fallout of porn culture and how terrible relationships between the sexes were becoming because of pornography, the mainstreaming of internet porn, and just the normalization of porn. And then watching the gender insanity come in, I started really noticing that, like in 2009, 2010, and immediately sensing this extreme danger. And when I tried to speak out about it on the left, oh, it was just like being 7 years old and Stacey Bender telling me, you can't say that, you can't think that. If you say it again, you're excommunicated. So that's a brief recap of my trajectory there.
Yeah, so in the mid 2010s, maybe like 2015, 16, you were a very active midwife. You had overseen a bunch of home births, and you were part of the Midwest Alliance of North America, or the Midwives Alliance of North America. And you and a friend of yours, Michelle, had drafted a letter that represented like thousands of midwives throughout North America. And that really sprung you onto the national scene. Maybe you can tell a little bit about what was going on there and what that letter was about.
Sure. You know, we've all have so many threads to our story. And I think, okay, what I just told you about myself is certainly not everything about myself. That I also, from the time I was a little tiny girl, I wanted to help women have babies. I kind of want to be like an old school country doctor, which actually my great grandfather had been that, and his wife was a midwife. So my great grandmother was a midwife. I wanted to, like, you know, be on horseback with a doctor bag and go help people have babies and help people heal. And so I was tracked for med school. And then in college, I learned about midwifery for the first time in a contemporary context. And I immediately switched gears from thinking I was going to become an OB/GYN to realizing I want to be, this is what I want to be. I want to be a midwife. This puts together so much of who I am. My love of women, my love of medicine, my desire to help people liberate themselves from institutions that are trying to make them think they're not capable of making their own decisions. I just fell in love with midwifery. So I became a midwife, became a home birth midwife here in New Mexico. And I had a very busy practice. I served on the board of directors of the Midwives Alliance of North America from 1998 to 2001. I served on the board of directors of the National Association of Certified Professional Midwives later in the early 2000s. I worked very hard in my own state to promote midwifery and to help promote women's birth choices. So I was very invested in it. That was my world. I loved the midwifery world. I loved the other midwives. I loved the political midwives. I loved the women who wanted to liberate birth. And around 2009, we started noticing these new young activists kind of showing up in the birth world with a lot of new language, where they wanted us to start saying, women aren't the only people who give birth, and men can give birth. And more than that, they were saying, we need to stop focusing on mainstream normal women. We've got to focus on the most marginalized women, like if we have to only focus about like the homeless woman who doesn't speak English, who has AIDS, like that's who we should be focusing on, which was an enormous shift from midwifery is for normal birth, and seeing midwifery as, I view it almost as like ecological preservation, of trying to keep as many humans healthy and normal as possible, like land preservation of land that hasn't been contaminated. For me, that's how I always viewed midwifery, is like, let's keep as many humans healthy as possible. Let's get as many humans healthy as possible. And we were being told that was privileged. We were only focusing on privileged women. We have to focus on the sickest women, the women with the worst circumstances, which isn't midwifery, you know? And with that came the language changes. The old guard held that off for a while. And then in 2014, these young activists who often came in with a bunch of funding, they'd been trained in training programs that often had a lot of billionaire money behind them, they kind of took over in 2014. And in 2014, the Midwives Alliance of North America changed their professional guidelines to say, in the core competencies for this, they no longer acknowledge women give birth. They erased the words woman and mother from the entire document of the core competencies for midwives. My friend Michelle Pacino, who had also sat strategizing, researching, trying to figure out what to do, what should we do about what was happening to midwifery. And we drafted an open letter to the Midwives Alliance of North America explaining exactly why we thought this was dangerous, how it didn't fit with the midwifery model of care. Midwifery is women's space, it's sacred women's tradition. And we published that open letter in 2015. We got many, many signers. I think we have well over 1,000 signers, including some heavy hitters like Ina May Gaskin, she wrote Spiritual Midwifery. She was one of the founding mothers of the modern home birth movement. Susan Hodges from Citizens for Midwifery. Like, there were a lot of big names that signed, and MANA just ignored us. And then when they couldn't ignore us anymore, they actively tried to shut us down and purge us from the organization. In 2015, the MANA, right after we'd written our letter, MANA refused to sit with us, even though we had both sat on the board of this organization, and we had many former board members on our list of signers. Instead, they worked with a queer justice organization to draft a response that was called Birth for Everybody. They separated those into two words, not birth for everybody, one word, birth for everybody. Just that mechanistic, reductionist, almost necrophilic root of this transhumanist agenda, right? That like we're just being chopped into parts that were just bodies. And that was what they labeled their letter. And then they just went through line by line with queer speak, supposedly rebutting us, but just saying crazy things like, we said that we're concerned, midwifery has always been about the natural design of the human body, and that we're perfectly designed to do this, that, we have the power to birth on our own. And so using the term natural, and they said, there's nothing more natural than expressing yourself. There's nothing more natural than doing what you want to do. So they didn't have an actual rebuttal. It was all just a bunch of that postmodern queer speak of their rebuttal. And Michelle and I tried to get a table at the MANA conference to express our view. We weren't allowed to have a table. We were followed around at the conference by security. Anytime we put materials out, they were immediately confiscated. So we held a shadow conference in that same hotel. We held an underground alternative conference where we talked about radical feminism. We talked about the risks of gender identity to humanity, especially to women and our sex-based rights. We talked about the commodification of the human body and how we're all being encouraged to just sell our body parts. We talked about milk selling, egg poaching, plasma, surrogacy. We talked about the dangers of hormonal contraception. We really talked about these, the risk of big tech transhumanism to women's sovereignty. And we had many women came by to our little, alternative conference we put on. So yeah, that's how I kind of burst onto the scene as I called. Michelle Evans called me a high-profile TERF. So I'm happy to.
I love the fact that you ladies were more subversive than the subversionists. That you even went more subversive than them. And you mentioned some of the way that they just take this incredible spiritual experience for a female to be a life giver, that sacred space. And one thing about me, I just wanted to share is that my daughter is a midwife, and she's in medical school now in order to become a doctor in midwifery. Mm-hmm. And she invited me to be at the birth up in Canada. And Canada's pretty liberal. Midwives are much more common than in America. And I was actually in the room, and I watched her give birth to my granddaughter. And it was a family experience. It was the most spiritual thing I ever experienced, watching my own child bring forth life, and how incredible that experience was. It did something deep within me, And so when you have this marginalizing of something so incredible and so empowering and so sacred for the entire family, and then they just talk about everybody, and they like diminish it in so many ways. I'd like you to talk a little bit about things that are happening, like the surrogacy and egg harvesting and different things that are going on that actually take away the the incredible spiritual wonder of motherhood and childbirth, and how this is being mistreated.
Right. Ooh, I've been feeling very heavy about surrogacy recently. I mean, I have for a long time, but it's ratcheting up so much. I think anyone who's paying attention can see that there's a mass marketing push for surrogacy among the celebrity class, which we all know, the ruling class, the people who actually like run the world, use these trendsetters of celebrities to sell what the new trends are going to be. And so in the last few weeks, we've seen Chrissy Teigen and Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell, they just said, becomes a mother at 53. You're never too old to be a mother. And then later down in the article is that she hired a surrogate and bought a baby. Like, she did not give birth at 53. Chrissy Teigen kissing the belly of the woman she's hiring to gestate the baby she's going to buy. Surrogacy is so horrific to me. Oh, and then many, many gay men, including Dave Rubin on the right. Like, this is not a right-left issue. Watching Jordan Peterson congratulate Dave Rubin on right now and ratcheting up, we're just getting an onslaught of propaganda normalizing surrogacy. So to me, it's in roots, this degradation of motherhood. And I'm always shocked that people don't understand the primacy of birth. Like, pregnancy and birth is what makes us all human. Like, that is not debatable. Like, that is our common human experience. That is how we become human, is we are conceived within the body of a woman, though now, like, sometimes we're conceived in a lab, but for all of human history up until the last tiny blip, we are conceived in the body of a human. We are made by a woman with her blood, sweat, and tears. Like, she makes us with 9 months of work to make that baby. And she moves through her own challenges. Like, birth pushes you so far past what you think you can do. She has to open up and be a channel and let us come into this world through her own, mind-blowing physical and psychospiritual process of birth. And then, we still remain one with our mother, and the cord is still attached, and the placenta is still working. We're two but one at that point, and then our mother feeds us from our bodies. That is the human design. That is what makes everybody human. And the fact that it's still considered so controversial and radical to say birth is the primary issue, birth is the template for what society believes is true, birth is the primary rite of passage, and how we give birth tells us everything about what a culture believes. So right now, we believe motherhood isn't important, and that there's no such thing as a primal attachment that starts in the womb. And I mean, Michael, it's breaking my heart. I mean, it feels this gender issue of pretending there's not a unique state of being of femaleness, and this is feeling like humanity.
Where do you see it taking humanity? Because a novice, most people would say, "Oh, isn't that nice that a woman can't have a baby, but somebody else is carrying the baby, and they're getting some economic benefit from it, maybe a college student." But then the mom is actually going to realize her dream to be a mom. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about. I'd like to go a little deeper about the ethics involved that are shocking and things that we should be concerned about as a society.
I think where it's going to take us inevitably is artificial wombs. I think that where it's going to take us is this transhumanist hellscape, like the Matrix, which we've warned ourselves. Like, we go back and look at science fiction for close to 100 years. Even Mary Shelley, like, we've been warning ourselves about this. We've been warning ourselves not to do this. I believe, again, that pregnancy and birth is what makes us human. And when you separate the woman from that experience and act as though she's just secondary to that, we have completely dehumanized half of humanity. And I'd step back even further and say we've dehumanized all of humanity, because we all come from that. We all come from that process. And this is where, I'd ask men in particular to think a little more deeply that, if men don't see a problem with surrogacy, the thing of surrogacy is the end point of equality feminism, right? It's the end point of liberal feminism, that we can be like men, who's made the baby. and the primal connection to our mothers, which is different than our connection to our fathers. And that's okay. It doesn't mean fathers aren't important. It doesn't mean anything except that it's important, that our first love is our mother. Our first relationship is our mother. It is what makes us human, and that women are because there's, we don't have a loving culture. Many people really don't like women. Men, the paternity anxiety that is centuries, millennia old in men, that has created women as chattel, that I have to own this woman so I know who my children are. All of that has led up to surrogacy, where we just completely dehumanize women with this process and view women as nothing but a mechanical machine to incubate somebody else's property, and then the person can come get their property. So it's just part of the old story, in my opinion. It's just another step in the same story that's been going on since women were property. And also children as property. Like, children are now a commodity. The trendsetters, the Kardashians, the models, the fashion people, all of these rich people are buying babies and everyone's celebrating. It's turning children into a commodity as well.
Well, this is really fascinating for me, looking at these sociological dynamics from a female perspective. You just see a tearing down and like as some have referred to as an erasure of women. And me speaking as a man who's a father and a grandfather, when people start talking about, oh, let's smash down the patriarchy, the evil patriarchy, all the problems of the world are because of the patriarchy. And I think, like, well, how does that win over a Jewish Christian man who, when there's a worldview that says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that a legacy, and like, what's wrong with a man loving his wife for 50, 60 years and producing stable kids and grandkids and stability, and then maybe leaving a little bit of an inheritance? I mean, why would you want to smash that? That just seems like an attack on masculinity. But like, looking at it from a female perspective, this woke, leftist, post-millennial, destructive force, it's like it's trying to destroy everything, the culture, masculinity, femininity, human sexuality, every aspect of what's built our society. And I've known you've been outspoken about your concerns of this trans cult invading women's spaces. Perhaps you could, even beyond the birthing room and pregnancy, maybe you can talk about some of your concerns about, what's going on with women's only spaces and the onslaught of relentless attack against women.
Right. What even is a woman? I feel the same way. And I we're a sexually dimorphic species, but men and women are different. Males and females are different. And so the trans thing, again, it's another really heavy topic that sometimes feels like the end of humanity to me. Why is this important? And on so many levels, it's important. But from a female perspective, there's certain things that I think, I talk to my husband or my son or my male friends, and I just realize sometimes, oh, they really don't. How could they? But they really don't understand what it's like to live in a world where you have to negotiate with male violence always as a female. I'm a small female. I'm 5 feet tall. I live in a world where I have to negotiate with the fact that there are potentially violent men around. There are other species that have, birds are very egalitarian. Some of the mammals are egalitarian. We look to be like one of the kind of species where our males have a tendency toward aggression, and that can be very dangerous to the females and the children. And because of that, females have an innate design that we can clock a male easily. The safety of myself and my children, I need to know if I have to be vigilant. I need to, they tell us in medicine, if we're first responders, the first thing you do is not run over to the person. The first thing is assess the safety of the scene. As a female, I am divinely designed to be able to assess the safety of a scene for myself and my children, which means I need to be able to tell if there are males around, especially males, male and children only, for our own safety when it comes to locker rooms and bathrooms and even if we just want to relax, if we just want to be away from the constant low to high grade, depending on the situation, very real threat of male violence against us and our children. So how does that hit? Does that sound like something you can hear?
It sounds perfect. I mean, it makes perfect sense. In prisons, the most vulnerable time, and if a human's incarcerated, they're totally subjected to the system. And then to introduce a biological male into that system is just cruel and unusual punishment to me. I mean, that's just why we would even consider allowing that is pretty much disgraceful. One of the things that you talk a lot about is freedom. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the incarcerated women would definitely count as those most marginalized women, right? When you're talking to the left speak people, and the fact that so few people care about them, but that we are putting rapists, male rapists, into women's prisons is part of the psychological war against all women, but is a very physical and real torture of those incarcerated women. Like this is a horrific situation. I'm glad you brought it up. It's just, I'm going to weep about it. I can't even believe we live in a society where people hate women that much that they would prioritize the emotional needs or desires of a man. Part of women's humanity is almost too much to bear when you really think about it.
And the utter hypocrisy of the intersectionality people, I mean, think of the intersectional victimization, oppressed classes that are involved with incarceration for females, and there's no compassion, whatever happens. One of the things that I love about you and I resonate with you is this concept of freedom and liberation. And you've been a lifelong liberation activist. And I've heard you speak about forced medicalization. I've heard you talk about big pharma. I've heard you talk about women's spaces, compelled speech, and things like this. And so I'd like you to open up your heart and just talk about, what's your revelation? What's your passion in terms of freedom and liberty? And what are the encroaching things that keep you up at night or bring you concerns about what you see going on all around us?
We're living in very interesting times. So for me, I am a human sovereignty activist, and I would define sovereignty as the ability to make our own decisions free of corporate and state interests, free of ruling class interference. And I want that for everybody, as in a way that for me, sovereignty means acting in a way we have sovereignty over ourselves as long as we're not hurting anybody else. So coercion, free of ruling class pressure. And I really believe human free will is such an amazing gift. And I think there are forces that want to break our wills and harness our creative power for their own agenda. And I think we could all agree with that throughout history. There are ruling class forces that want to set the agenda for everybody else. So right now, my feet had cut out earlier, and I was talking about big pharma.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there is, spiritual warfare, because every time you talk about things that are concerning and things that are going on relevant to culture, it's like the devils act up and they shut you up. Mm-hmm. You don't have freedom to speak here. So right now we stop that in Jesus' name.
I know. So it's really interesting in our conversation in particular. And my biggest concern right now on most days is the pharmaceutical industry, or what we call big pharma, which I think is a predatory industry that wants to turn every human on the planet into an illness-identified daily pharmaceutical customer. And we're living in a time where in the United States, at least, most people are drugged every day. I think 70% of US adults are taking at least one pharmaceutical medication every day. Many, many children are taking daily pharmaceuticals. The trans agenda is obviously turning people into lifelong pharmaceutical dependence. Nearly 100% of births in our culture, well, close to it, well over 90% of births in our culture are big tech, big pharma events. So we are initiated into big tech and big pharma as our birthing force, right? That we believe we can't give birth unless we're hooked up to machines and we've got drugs running and we've got a tube in every orifice and we are delivered from the process by big tech and big pharma. So those forces, I truly believe, are wanting to turn us all into their, I don't know if it's serfs is the right word. It almost feels worse than that. Like they're definitely their dependents. So in my work, I really try to help people liberate themselves from that. And one place I like to work is, how do you heal? How to help people who can get off daily meds. How to help people understand that healing is possible without pharmaceuticals. And in fact, healing is not really possible with pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceutical model doesn't heal; it creates lifelong drug dependence, right? People aren't healed of their asthma from their puffers. People aren't healed of their type 2 diabetes from the medication. Those are conditions that people can heal and recover from and not have anymore. But we're told the treatment, the healing for that is to take daily drugs. So that's one of my loves and passions, is to try to help people achieve health sovereignty in their lives, because health is freedom.
And personal empowerment, where you're not dependent on a drug or outside forces, but our bodies were made to heal. Our bodies are made to be healthy, and diet, exercise, prayer. I mean, all sorts of things we can do to put us in a better state of mind. Is this big pharma is just a mask to cover up what's really going on, and people don't get real healing. And so I'm with you on that. What you were outspoken too against a recent sociological dynamic that we all lived through, and that was some forced medicalization. And you were very outspoken about that and concerned. I was wondering if maybe you could gently wade into those waters.
Sure. That was, I don't even want to call it COVID. I would call it the totalitarian response to COVID was probably the most difficult thing I've ever been through. And I've been through some really difficult things. I have not had, I haven't had the hardest life, but I haven't had the easiest life. And that really was hard. So forced and coerced medical care, in my opinion, is always wrong. I don't care what the circumstance, it is not okay. And to force healthcare providers to participate in that is equally unokay. I think people forgot, it's like I was raised in a generation, never forget about the Holocaust. And we were told over and over again, never forget, so it won't happen again. And I know we're not allowed to compare anything to the Holocaust, but why were we told never to forget if we weren't going to be on alert for similar things coming down the road? And I really wish more people would read the Nuremberg laws and understand that the Nazi project and the Holocaust were carried out entirely under the guise of public health. That was a public health policy of the Nazis. And the very first segregation of the Jews, the segregation of the train platforms, which was really the beginning of the horrors that started being institutionalized, was public Jews assembled. It's for everybody's good if we separate the train platforms, because we don't want people to get typhus. This is for the good of the Jews and for the good of everyone else. So good Germans who weren't necessarily seething with anti-Semitism went along with it because it was about public health. And then the ghettos were first established they were pushed on the masses as a public health project because, again, the Jews had diseases, particularly typhus. Anyway, we know how that story went. It was horrible. And at the end of World War II, we had the Nuremberg trials, which were the very first international human rights tribunal trials. And they, tried to assess what happened so we could make sure it wouldn't happen again. And they wrote the very first international human rights law, which is the Nuremberg laws. And the Nuremberg laws are 100% about having to participate in that was really rough. I am 100% pro-choice on all medical decisions, including vaccination. It's very, very interesting that when I am pro-choice on abortion, I get called pro-abortion. When I'm pro-choice on vaccine, I get called anti-vaccine. I find that fascinating.
That's so funny. There's a man who I met about 6 weeks ago at an event that he spoke at, and had some private time with him, and then had a dinner party with him. And his name is Eric Metaxas, and I don't know if you've heard of him. He's written several books. He approaches life from a Christian worldview. He's from Yale, and he wrote a book comparing what was going on, because it wasn't like Hitler came on the scene and the very next day there was gas chambers built. It was a slow erosion of the German populace, the church in particular, that just went along with it, didn't want to get involved, didn't want to say anything, the sociological pressures. And it didn't happen overnight, but he was making a parallel of what he sees going on in America, of what happened in Nazi Germany. And it took about a decade to see the atrocities that we had. And it was his book is a wake-up call for America. And he said very few, it's a Christian author. He said very few of the Christians or the pastors or leaders were actually speaking up. And if a few hundred more would have, it probably would have stopped what was happening, but they didn't. And there was a few like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others that are famous. And he was saying it's a wake-up call for America when we see all this compulsion of speech, compulsion of medicalization, a loss of freedom, the unity between business and government, and all the things that are high tech and the technocracy that exists and the lack of freedoms. He says he lines it up and he makes a great parallel of what was happening in Germany. And he's saying, look, wake up, America. It's time to speak up. Everybody needs to focus on our liberty and our freedoms, because this could all go away and we can end up in a really, really dark place as a nation, as a society. And you don't start out with gas chambers, but you sure as heck can end in it. And like you said, never forget, or that saying, oh, when they came for the Jews, nobody stood up, or they came for the blacks or the homosexuals, nobody stood up, and they came for me and there was nobody left to stand up. I mean, you've heard that before. And so I think now is it's a time for us to speak out about freedom. It's for freedom we've been set free. Our entire Constitution is based on liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and this cancel culture, this silence and this timidity, and this, and some of us will go down. I mean, some of us will lose our jobs or be thrown in prison. But, if we can get critical mass, we begin to marginalize, because 90% of America doesn't want, males competing in female sports. They don't want the sexualization of our 8-year-olds and puberty blockers for kids that can't make even a decision. They aren't even old enough to buy a beer or vote, or, their brains aren't developed. Most people, but people are just afraid of the mob. They're afraid of being canceled. And I do see a shift. Do you see some kind of shift going on in terms of freedom and people taking a stand more? Or are we just a bunch of cowards that are just going to sit back in our generation and just watch everything that was sacrificed for us, the generations before us that fought for freedom? Are we just going to cede all that to a tyrannical government?
We'll see. We'll see how the story plays out, right? I think, history gives us examples of both, but mostly we get examples of people going along with it. It's an interesting thing. I think it was Zuby who said the majority of people behave like the majority of people. So we're herd animals. We do tend to just conform to what's happening around us. I hope people will wake up. I keep thinking the trans thing is just, it's so ridiculous and it's so over the top and it's so clearly harmful to children and women and our ability to name reality. I keep thinking that this would be the issue that would just break the bubble for people. But I'm amazed. Still on the left, I see people saying, well, actually men and women aren't that different in strength and size. And I just think, are you crazy? I distinctly remember the moment when my brother, who is like 11 months younger than me, became stronger than I was. Like I had ruled over him. He was my minion. Like he would do whatever I said until we hit puberty, and then suddenly, I mean, he could just knock me over with very little effort. Like I know I lost my power over him because he became so strong. Like men are unquestionably physically stronger than women. Do I think that means men are superior and should rule over women? No, I think that only a very bad man thinks he's better than women because he can hit harder. I don't think that's a good example of why you'd be a superior person. But I think it's how our species is designed, that men are bigger to protect us, because estrogen stops our long bone growth in puberty so we can change our bone structure to have babies, and we need men to have their role of protecting us when we're vulnerable. And we again have become so untethered from our nature and from our physiological design that I just keep thinking everybody's going to wake up, but people apparently are just really disconnected and not in their bodies and not physically interacting with each other. Maybe it's because people don't have siblings anymore. People don't wrestle as kids. We've been bombarded with propaganda of these female superheroes, of these teeny tiny, 5'4", 100-pound women who can bring down the Hulk. Like that's part of the propaganda that has gotten into people's minds, to believe that girls are just as strong as boys, women are just as strong as men. And people believe it. They're actually justifying, like Leah Thomas, they're justifying the takeover of women's sports. They're denying the reality of women's physiological vulnerability to male violence. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. But history's full of hoodwinking. Listen to The Emperor's New Clothes. We don't listen to Little Red Riding Hood. We don't listen to these stories we have that are supposed to warn us about this.
Yeah, and on the masculine side, there's this radical feminization of males. A young man who's gone through puberty, who wants to take on the world and pursue his dreams and get married, and he's told there's global warming and your toxic masculinity, and there's rape culture on college campuses. And I get there's anomalies and there's problems, but the majority of men aren't like that, and so they're afraid. They're afraid to date women. They're afraid to. People aren't having sex like they used to have anymore. There's much more less complicated just by using porn versus interacting with the human relationship. And in the same way, there's biology and the way we're made as men. We want to protect our family. We want to be the strong leader in our family in terms of, I'm sure if you were in a fight with your husband, he could probably beat the crap out of you, the 5-foot wife, but he loves you, and he wants to protect you and go through life with you and respect you and watch you flourish. And that's the way most men are that are in a healthy marriage. They love their wives and they love their children, and they want to be there for them, and they want to be their protector and their hero, and and support and everything that makes a healthy relationship. And it's not just America. That's the way humanity in every culture of the world is. I mean, that it doesn't matter if you're in Africa or Russia or Ukraine or Asia or South America. I mean, there's observable differences in male and females, and there's similarities within disparate cultures about the way men and women relate and intimacy and how the species goes on. And there's this massive attack both on femininity and the woman, and on the man, and on the family. And so this wokeism, this critical social justice, doesn't produce anything. It's cynical, it's destructive, and anything it gets its hands on, whether it's an atheist group, whether it's a church, whether it's a business, whether it's your group for midwifery, it just seeks to tear it all apart and builds absolutely nothing. And so I just want people to wake up. And that's why, I started this little podcast trying to amplify voices of people that were on the left that bought into the dialectic, but they realized, this has gone way, way over the top. It's time to step back. And I want people to have courage that are in college, to not get sucked into it, or those that are sucked into it to leave it and begin to stand up against it. Otherwise, God only knows how destructive this is all going to become.
Again, it's really a war on humanity. And yes, our men are broken, our women are broken, and I hate to be like the single issue person, but I'm just going to keep bringing it back to birth. That birth is the primary human experience. Like it is in the sense of our first experience in the world, right? And birth is designed to turn women into mothers, and by that I don't mean like this out. So the breaking of birth has broken humanity, where birth is designed to awaken a woman's instincts, not just her love for that baby, but her
Yes.
fierceness of protection. And what you experienced with your daughter, right? Everyone present at an unmedicalized birth. So you experienced being present at an undisturbed birth with your daughter, an unmedicalized birth, which is how humans are designed to birth. That is the template for birth for all but the last 75 years. What you experienced was the design of bonding, of fierce love, of that physical incarnation of human love that is the birth experience. And the woman is flooded with the love hormone oxytocin that bonds her profusely with her body and also wakes up her instincts. She would lay down her life for that baby. She is fierce. She knows what to do because her ancient instincts have awoken. I didn't have to read any books on how to mother any more than my dog would need to, because I had an undisturbed, it's supposed to work, are fierce mothers. And we have lost that. And now we have a society of coddling mothers who are terrified of everything, who have not woken up to their own power through this process that is divinely designed to make us understand how incredibly powerful we are, how we can do so much more than we thought we could, how we don't need to be afraid of life, because life has gotten as raw as it could possibly get, as intense as it could possibly get, and we made it through. Now, instead of that, we're all born drugged. Our mothers give birth drugged. Women say, they say, when I brought you home from the hospital, to denote when they began mothering, where that's not even in my mind as the beginning of my mothering. I started mothering during my pregnancy and then continued mothering through my birth. And I don't have any idea of like when someone gave me the baby, when the medical authorities gave me the baby to take home as the beginning of my mothering. This creates very different mothers, and it creates coddling mothers, and it creates scared mothers. It creates who trust authority figures more than themselves. It creates a culture where you're going to run to the doctor every time there's physical discomfort, and it creates weak men because of that. And we keep pretending it's something else, but we've broken birth, and it's how we've broken humanity. And maybe it's more than that, but we can't fix it until we fix this.
That is so powerful. My wife is 56 years old, and we've had 4 children. I'm so charged up. I wanted to get pregnant one more time. I guess she can't, huh? Okay, so I have go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, did you have something to say? I was being silly, but
I obviously get really lit up. No, I hear it. We should be, because that's the procreative urge. That is the root of our libido, is wanting to create life. And
yes,
again, maybe it's because I'm raised Catholic, but I think the separation of sex from procreation has really messed us up as humans, to completely sever that, because our drive to sexually connect with others comes from that desire to create life. And yes, we should get really excited, not in a pornified way, but an on fire with life way when we hear about birth. When I think of my births, I'm like, oh, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. If I weren't 53 I would love to do it again. I used to say, like, I'd love to do it again and again, but I don't want to keep raising all those babies. It's exhausting, but it lights us up.
Yes.
It lights us up as it's designed to do. And instead we fear it, we medicalize it. That's like, you talk about cancel culture. We start talking about how, natural birth home birth, family-centered birth should be the ideal. Oh, you're going to get shut down. Everyone's going to jump in. But I was high risk. I would have died. Like 95% of women think they or their baby would have died if they hadn't turned themselves over to the authorities for their birth process.
Yeah, our last child was born at home, and it was an incredible event. There was probably 15 to 20 people there. It was like an event. We were upstairs, and the midwife was there, and there was actually a practice that had a doctor. My wife did the labor in the hot tub, and then but brothers were there. My mom was there. There was friends there, and just as we got closer to her giving birth, everybody was just riveted, and it was an experience that many people never had. And the next thing you know, you hear a baby crying, and just the joy in the family and the celebration amongst friend and family of that home birth was unlike anything you get in a hospital.
Mm-hmm. Right. They've robbed us of that. And Marston Wagner, who was a very outspoken home birth activist, who was actually the head of maternal child health of the World Health Organization in the 80s, trying to preserve home birth as the norm worldwide. He was not successful. He said, that birth is the pinnacle of a woman's power. And if you take that power away from her and you put it on the medical authorities, you've got her for life. And she's going to run to you every time her kids have the sniffles and every time she has hot flashes or menstrual cramps. And this, again, is the primary rite of passage. And if we look at our birth practices, it's capturing everyone into this techno-pharmaceutical model where those are our lords and masters, and that is who runs the show.
Okay, I have another question for you. Have you ever heard of a man named James Lindsay? Are you familiar with that name?
Yes, yeah, the cynical theories, and yeah, he's an interesting philosopher.
Yeah, he's one of the leading voices of the culture wars today, and he talks about this wokeism being really a Gnostic religion where you have knowledge imparted to you, and it doesn't have to necessarily be based on fact or reason, but it's like you just know that you know because like something spiritual happens, and reason doesn't matter anymore. It's just that you know that all of this oppressed dialectic is true, and you can't be talked out of it. You can't be reasoned with. You can't win an argument. And he himself has said he's never won an argument with a radical, critical social justice warrior because they freak out if you just push back on them. And so what he says that, and I want to be careful here because I don't want you to get upset, but I'm just telling you what he says. He says that a lot of what's happened and the crushing of what's going on with feminism and the co-opting and the takeover by the trans cult was actually bought on by the feminists themselves when they decided to begin to look at Judith Butler's gender performance and taking gender away from biological sex and looking at it as like it's staged or it's how you feel and it's not rooted in biological reality. And then it opened the door. It was part of the trunk of feminism, and not all feminism. He's not saying it about your type of feminism that's looking to just empower women, but the critical feminism that's looking to just destroy society and tear things apart and destroy. They hate society because they're disadvantaged because of the patriarchy, and we have to tear it down. He talks about that specific part of feminism. And he says that, well, now it's been co-opted by the trans cult, and he likens it to a train. And you guys want, not you personally, but you guys as feminists or the critical feminists want to get off the train and stop. But they're like, oh no, we're not stopping at this station. We're going all the way, and we're taking over. and he kind of blames the radical feminists, the critical feminists, as the ones that opened that door, and now they're in prison to it, and now they're getting brutalized by the trans movement. And so I don't know if this makes sense to you, but how would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond that he needs to learn his history and know that women have been speaking out within feminism against transgenderism since the 70s. I mean, Robin Morgan spoke out against it profusely in 1971, and she even took flack for it back then. Janice Raymond wrote The Transsexual Empire, which is one of the most amazing analyses. I would say that transgenderism and transhumanism are part of the project. Like, these are people who don't see any problem completely modifying the body with pharmaceuticals, with surgeries, with medication. Often these people are fine with the transhumanist agenda. If we're all going to be equal in the digital world, right? So that type of feminism is not the same as radical feminism, which is a radical analysis of the power dynamics between males and females and how to negotiate between our different experiences in this world, and how to advocate for the rights of women from that perspective. So I see what James is saying. I also think that he doesn't acknowledge the work of the radical feminists of the late 60s and early 70s who saw this coming, who fought against it, who spoke out against it. He's looking just at academia. I also think his analysis of how academia works is lacking, and that he doesn't talk about the moneyed forces that came in and changed the women's studies departments in the late early 90s. All shifted from women's studies to gender and sexuality studies. And that wasn't a grassroots women's movement. That was about big moneyed forces actively trying to destroy women's studies departments and bring in this postmodern anti-woman stuff, and to teach it to young women who legitimately want to learn about women's studies, but now are becoming pro-porn and prostitution activists who think surrogacy is fine and think a man in a dress is a woman. So yeah, I would love to have a conversation with James. I'm not sure we're both very argumentative personalities, and I wonder who could mediate that conversation in a way that we didn't yell at each other. Because I think both of us are very argumentative people. But I disagree with his analysis in many ways. I agree with his analysis in the other ways.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Anyway, I'd like to give you the last word. Is there anything it's in your heart? One of the things I really want for this show is I want people to avoid this conscientization of this, getting seduced into this ideology as a religion, or those that are in it, give them a tool to get out. What would you say to these type of people, somebody who might be listening, that might be open to hear your lifelong experience, and maybe have a positive influence on them to avoid this mind virus?
I think that the real binary that needs to be broken is the right-left artificial binary. I think we're entering times where it's no longer right, left, liberal, conservative. Those old classifications don't fit what we're facing as the challenges of our world right now. The differences between people who are pro-freedom and pro-human sovereignty versus pro-techno-authoritarianism. And I really ask people to step back and be on the side of humanity.
I love that. I heard a conference that you were speaking at. You self-identified as politically non-binary, and I thought that was hysterical.
Right.
Well, Mary Lou, I just really appreciated our
Right.
visit, and it seems like your practice is booming. I don't know if you're taking on new patients, or if there's a way people can get a hold of you to maintain communication with you. It's been an honor for me that you would actually take the time to come on our show and have this dialogue with me, and hopefully it'll have a positive effect on some people.
It's okay. My practice, Enchanted Family Medicine, is taking new patients. I recently made a shift to stop taking insurance and stop participating in that corporate system that entails a lot of surveillance that I didn't want to be part of anymore. So I am now a sovereign practitioner and have a private pay practice. So I do have spaces available for people who want truly autonomous healthcare. And people can find me at Mary Lou Singleton at Substack or enchantedfamilymedicine.com.
Now, do you do telemed services, or does it have to be in person?
I do telemed services. It's not my favorite. I don't like to do it for people who could come in person, but for people from a distance, I'd be happy to talk with people remotely.
Okay, well, really appreciate you. I appreciate your heart, and I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more from you in the future. And because you're a powerful voice, and you make a great impact on people. And so thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. It's wonderful. Yeah, and I hope to collaborate in the future. Thank you.
Okay, you take care.